I am lucky enough to be joined now by Vinny Bonsignore, Raider Nation radio host. Inside the Huddle is where you can catch him on the radio, and also Las Vegas Raiders beat writer for the Las Vegas Review-Journal. Vinny, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So let's do a little draft chat if we can. If you look at what the Raiders need from a draft standpoint, it may seem pretty straightforward on the outside. Seems like they've got some starting vacancies at right tackle and free safety. But how far beyond this particular draft does this team's needs actually go?
Yeah, that's a good point. As of right now, they've got 25 players under contract for 2022. So there's a bunch of players that they have that are on one-year deals or on the last year of their deals. So you're right. The most glaring needs, the most immediate needs, the ones that are staring us right in front of in our face is that right tackle position and free safety. But if you look at across their roster, from the offensive line to the defensive line to linebackers, they're going to be looking to fill a bunch of holes that will be created at the conclusion of the season when contracts start running out, and a lot of them.
You mentioned the brevity of some of those contracts. I know that the Raiders tried to address some of their defensive issues in free agency. Do you expect them in this draft to continue to address defensive problems? I know I've read recently that you wrote that they gave up the third most points in the league last season. I mean, how do you see them playing this draft out?
Yeah, it almost has to be. You look back at last year, the offense gave the defense the lead against the Kansas City Chiefs, against the Miami Dolphins, and against the Los Angeles Chargers with 1:43 left, 19 seconds left, and in overtime. All the defense needed to do is make a stop, and the Raiders had 3 more wins, and that would have been 11 wins, and they would have gotten into the playoffs with that record. So it just tells you how desperate they are to really get that defense improved and on par with the offense. And so, for that reason, they really do have to pay a lot of attention to the defensive side of the ball. Now, short of that right tackle position and trying to create some depth and development players along the offensive line, I would imagine that they're going to go heavy on defense, as they should.
One of the names that comes up time and time again in this draft, and granted there are some question marks, is linebacker Micah Parsons out of Penn State. Do you envision a scenario where he might drop to 17 and get within the Raiders' grasp?
Well, it's interesting. I did a mock draft over the weekend where I was part of a mock draft with the Los Angeles Times, picking for the Raiders at 17. And throughout the course of this practice, I kept checking in. Is Micah Parsons still on the board? Yes. Is Micah Parsons still on the board? Yes. Is Micah Parsons still on the board? Yes. And lo and behold, he was there at number 17. And, I'm not to say that all the beat writers covering the 16 teams drafting ahead of the Raiders, have the exact answer on what their teams are going to do. But they have a pretty good idea. And so he fell to 17 in that scenario. And I've seen some other mock drafts where he falls in that vicinity. There are some red flags. And I think from the Raiders' perspective, given those red flags, they have to determine, are they red flags or yellow flags? And if they're yellow flags that are manageable and they believe that they have the right infrastructure in place from a locker room standpoint to a coaching standpoint to off the field, in that organization to be able to smooth over any rough edges that might be there, then he's the type of defensive game changer that they absolutely need. So if it's a yellow flag, I could see them selecting Micah Parsons. But if it's a glaring red flag, and we aren't privy to all the information, then that's probably somebody that they need to steer clear of.
Covering the team the way that you do, from what you know about Jon Gruden and from what you know about Mike Mayock, are they the sort that would go for a yellow, orange, red flag if they have the type of player that is as talented as he is, knowing that that could be one of the cornerstone pieces that would ultimately go a long way in fixing some of their issues?
Yeah, I think yellow for sure. We're talking about 20, 21-year-old young adults. I look back at when I was 21 and, I'm probably sure I had some yellow flags myself at that time of my life. And so you just have to do as much homework as you possibly can to be able to alleviate the concern that it really isn't a red flag, and then it's something, whatever it is that's causing any of these flags on him. It's not enough that you don't feel like you can overcome it, or you don't feel like the infrastructure that you have in place is going to be able to help get him to a point where that's no longer an issue. But history has shown that there are players that do have the red flags, and they're in and out of the league as quickly as possible as a result. And so for the Raiders, it has to be, they have to do their homework, and I'm sure that they already have. And so we're going to find out on Thursday if he falls to them at 17, whether they felt like those flags are manageable or not.
I'm sure it can be tempting for Gruden, with the way that these last couple seasons have gone, to walk that tightrope when you see a player that might be a little bit troublesome, but that also has the potential to fix a gaping hole, because of the way that the NFL is structured, where you're only as good as the way last season ended. And for the Raiders, as you know, not so great. How much pressure is on Jon Gruden and Mike Mayock to a certain degree with this year's draft?
Well, I'll tell you, nobody puts more pressure on themselves than Jon Gruden. He's wound pretty tight, and he's kind of got like a maniacal obsession with getting this thing back in order, and this being the Raiders, and restoring them to their rightful place in his eyes. He feels like this is one of the cornerstone franchises, iconic franchises in the NFL. Obviously, they fell on hard times for pretty much the last 2 decades. He wants to get that squared away, and it burns intensely in him to do just that. Having said that, even at the high water points last year when they were 6-3, just doing my, the work that I do and touching base with my sources, even at that point, there was an understanding in that building that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. So whether they had won the necessary games to make the playoffs last year or not, I don't think that, even if had they done that, I don't think that it would have changed the self-perception that they had of themselves as a team that needed a lot of help, specifically on the defense, specifically on the defensive line, and bringing in game changers. So there was an awareness that they weren't there. Even if they would have gotten to the playoffs, they understood that there was a lot of work that needed to be done. And I think that's organizationally wide. So while from the outside it might seem like he's under a lot of pressure, I think there's an understanding in that building that they're kind of methodically, patiently, and maybe prudently putting this all together in a way that's going to ensure prolonged success rather than fleeting success. That's what they want to get away from as an organization. And this is one of the reasons why they gave Jon Gruden a 10-year contract and $10 million a year, is they felt like, for years, this organization had been putting Band-Aids on open, gaping wounds that may have provided temporary relief, but it really didn't do any good in terms of the long range. They wanted to get away from the quick fix and kind of start all over, giving Jon Gruden the kind of security that a coach needs to do it right. And whether they get that, whether he gets it right or not, that remains to be seen. But they're going to give him a long enough a runway to be able to create the kind of success that they want to start attaining here.
Which, in a sense, it all goes back to who do they pick up in free agency and who do they draft. If they're trying to build something substantial long term, and if the leash is a little bit longer than maybe it seems like to the outside world, this draft ultimately becomes more important and extends beyond just this year. Do you see Jon Gruden and Mike Mayock getting a little bit creative, pulling up in the draft, getting away from that 17 spot?
I could, actually. And, Mike Mayock, when we spoke to him last week, kind of alluded to, and it was somewhat telling, and, doing this for a while, sort of the way he couched it and worded it. And he basically said, hey, if there's somebody that, that going into this draft, we feel is going to be taken, in that top 5, top 6, top 7 range. But the draft turns out to unfold in a different manner, and that player starts falling, and now all of a sudden he's within striking range. Do we get creative and bold and go trade up for him? And I read that to mean that there's a couple of guys at least that they have their eye on, that they feel would probably be out of reach for them in a trade scenario, but they're definitely going to keep an eye on if they fall into that range. So I feel like if a player like, maybe it's Micah Parsons, maybe it's Trey Lance, the quarterback from North Dakota State, and they secure their future quarterback, but somebody in this draft, they have an inkling is going to go somewhere between 1 and 7, but has a chance to possibly fall a little bit further into trade range for them. And it'll be interesting to see if that actually happens, who that player is, and would the Raiders actually make a trade up to go get them.
They don't have that many players signed to the roster. I think I was reading from one of the things that you recently wrote that the 2022 roster has 25 players on their contract, and they've got a projected $50 million in cap space. So there's a little bit of room to make something happen here. Where is the good in that scenario, and where's the bad in that scenario?
Well, the good in that scenario, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but the good is the way they've been able to construct their contract or draft up their contracts, especially in free agency, is in a way that even if you make a mistake, which they have, Trent Brown was a mistake, LaMarcus Joyner was a mistake, Terrell Williams was a mistake. Some of those were, gaffes in just reading the player and how he was going to fit here with the Raiders. Some of it was also just out of their control in terms of the injuries of Trent Brown and Terrell Williams. But in any case, those were, if you look back now, mistakes. But they were able to write those contracts in a way where even though all of those contracts were 4-year deals, they were essentially 2-year deals. The players got the guaranteed money that they were owed in the first couple of years of those contracts, and which means if it was working, great, you move on to year 2 and year 4, or year 3 and year 4. No problem. But if it's not working, and in all 3 cases it wasn't, they could just say, okay, we're either going to trade you or release you, and there's no penalty. There's no big salary cap hit. You're not going to be paying for that mistake, years down the line. So that's actually a good thing, and it gives them the flexibility to move quickly away from players that aren't working out. The bad side of it is what we just mentioned. It means that they miscalculated on some players, and that's what they need to start avoiding here moving forward. They need to hit on more of those free agent pickups, and obviously the draft as well. And so that where that doesn't become an issue. Now, looking forward, they are in a pretty enviable position. They do have flexibility. They'll have money under the salary cap. Obviously, they're going to have some holes to fill, but they also feel like they've got a bunch of guys that are on 1-year deals that are incentivized to play well this year, to earn more or a bigger contract or more lucrative contract next year, whether it's here in Las Vegas or elsewhere. So they're going to get a bunch of hungry guys out there next year, you would imagine.
Vinny, you mentioned the possibility of Jon Gruden maybe getting creative, moving up in the draft. If by some chance a quarterback becomes available and going ahead and saying, you know what, there's value there, we're going to go ahead and select who our next quarterback is going to be. How long do the Raiders wait to go ahead and start thinking about securing that franchise piece at quarterback? Can they address defensive needs that they really, really need to address and put that off down the line, or should they really try to make that a priority?
And that's the big question. You can definitely see it both ways now. And they're also in a fairly they're in a position of strength with Derek Carr. He's under contract for the next 2 years, but none of it's guaranteed. Again, his contract, the way it was constructed, he got the bulk of his, I think it was $70 million. I can't remember exactly how much. It was a significant amount of money guaranteed. They paid that in the earlier part of the contract, which means he's now on and has been on basically a pay-by-play basis. So if they were able to secure their quarterback of the future, in Derek Carr, they have a player that, you would figure that he would stick around for this year. They're not going to punt on this year. They're not going to give up on this year. But next year, if they were to go down the quarterback path this year, and they feel like that young quarterback is ready to go next year, Derek Carr becomes a pretty valuable trade chip because he'll still be young at 31 years old. He's on a very favorable 1-year contract that pays him below, what good quarterbacks are making right now. So he'd be a good trade chip for them that probably would be able to get at least a first round, maybe 2 first-round picks in exchange. So, there's always been talk with Jon Gruden that he's gonna bring in his quarterback. Well, he's resisted that for the last 4 years. He and Derek Carr are on good terms. And I also, having said all that, I'm not ruling out whatsoever that the Raiders actually, extended Derek Carr's contract, so he'll be around here for, a good period of time. But again, that's interesting because they've made it clear that they did their homework on all quarterbacks that are in this draft, all the top 5 quarterbacks that are in this draft. And they have had extensive recent talks with Trey Lance, the North Dakota State quarterback. So it gives you a feeling that they're either very interested in him or they're trying to smokescreen somebody into potentially thinking that they are. So if he were to fall, let's say to 17, maybe there's a trade possibility there, or they're trying to throw. They maybe have a defensive player in mind or somebody else in mind, and trying to deke another team into thinking that they're thinking quarterback and not that player. So all kinds of different scenarios could unfold for sure.
We definitely want to ask you a couple questions about Minnesota before I get you out of here, Vinny. But I do want to ask you just before we let you go on the Raiders, because you cover them so closely. For those who are really big Las Vegas fans, which names should we keep an eye on in maybe the 3rd or the 4th rounds?
There's a safety from Syracuse, Andre Sisco. There is an offensive lineman, tackle from Northern Iowa, Spencer Brown. Those are 2 players that I feel like, the Raiders might have an eye on. Those are 2 positions, like I said, of need. So if they were able to address some other spots early on in the draft, and not that free safety and not that tackle position, they can circle back in that 3rd and 4th round with a guy like Andre Sisco from Syracuse or a Spencer Brown from Northern Iowa.
So as it relates to Minnesota, what, in your mind, Vinny, what would a successful draft for Minnesota look like?
Well, kind of like the Raiders, they need to solidify that offensive line, and they need pass rush. So it's kind of almost the exact scenario that the Raiders are in right now. But I also wouldn't rule out the Vikings with a quarterback, and Trey Lance in particular. Has it worked out with Kirk Cousins? Kinda, I guess. He's been serviceable. He's got them to the playoffs, and you can make the argument that whatever postseason failures they've had in terms of even reaching the postseason really weren't his fault. There's been letdowns in other areas of the team, kind of like here with the Raiders and Derek Carr. But at the same time, he's owed so much money and is on the books, I should say, for so much money. Do the Vikings maybe think about, what, it might be time to find a young quarterback that will have under control for the next 5 years on a rookie pay scale, which always allows you to be able to address other needs because you're not paying your quarterback $30 million a year and eating up so much of your salary cap. So at least from what I'm hearing, I wouldn't rule out quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. But if they go the traditional route or the safe route, the less risky route, I think an offensive lineman like Christian Darrisaw, a defensive end like Jalen Phillips from the University of Miami, maybe a Micah Parsons, maybe a Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah from Notre Dame, maybe a Tevin Jenkins, the offensive lineman from Oklahoma State, or Eliza Vera Tucker, offensive lineman from USC. I could definitely see them thinking along those lines in that first round.
One of the questions our producer wanted to know is which contract has made more sense so far, Kirk Cousins or Jon Gruden with Vegas?
Well, I mean, they're paying, I think, Jon Gruden, I don't think we're going to be able to answer that till about year 5 or so and looking back. And I say that because I think there was an understanding that, hey, this is going to take a little while. And we know that as an organization, that's what they were telling Jon Gruden. Hey, we're going to give you 10 years. It gives you the security and shows that we're going to be patient enough to let this thing unfold accordingly. Whereas I think the Vikings, they expected potentially Super Bowls by now with their franchise quarterback and everything else in place. It hasn't quite worked out that way. Some of it has been Kirk Cousins. Some of it has been around him, but they've paid him a lot of money, and they only have very moderate results to show for it. I think for Jon Gruden, that's something that they're waiting for that payoff in a big way moving forward, with the understanding that it was going to be rough for those first few years.
What does it say about the Raiders organization that they're willing to structure a contract like that for a head coach when, the mantra seems to be, what have you done for me lately? And we've seen so much movement, that they would look at Jon Gruden's resume and go, you know what, we know we need to rebuild. We're going to actually give you the time to do that if in fact they mean it.
I think it forces them to be in a position where they have to be patient. For far too long, if you look at the track record here with the Raiders, it's been start and stop. You bring in a coach, then you lose faith in him after a couple of years, and fire him and bring somebody else, and then that's the same exact scenario repeats itself, and it keeps setting them back. If you look at Derek Carr, I want to say that he's 3 or 4 head coaches, multiple offensive coordinators. He's just now getting into a groove with this coach and this system, and his play reflects that. And so from the Raiders' perspective, it's almost this self-imposed guardrail to protect them from what they've done in the past, and that's move on from somebody, way too soon perhaps, and then cost them valuable time in regrouping and resetting it and changing coaching staffs and regimes and general managers and personnel. They're going to stick with it here with Jon Gruden because they've kind of not handcuffed themselves, but they've put that self-imposed guardrail in place to make sure that, hey, even if we do, even if there are moments of frustration, even if there are moments of, man, did we make the right choice? You know what? We gave him that 10-year contract for this very reason, and we're going to stick to it.
It's an interesting move, and it'll be time, I guess, is the only thing that will tell whether or not that was ultimately the right call. Just one more on Minnesota. I know I've kept you for too long here. If you're looking at the draft on Friday night, is there a third round sort of quarterback that the Vikings might be looking at to target?
The quarterback from Stanford, Davis, I think is somebody that fits that bill. Jamie Newman from Wake Forest by way of Georgia might be somebody that they would be interested in. Mond from Texas A&M could be a guy in that realm on Friday night. You're talking about the second and third. That might be a little bit too high for a couple of those guys, but those are the names that I would think about, whether it's day 2 or day 3.
Is there value? Is there quarterback value to be had at, in the later rounds of this draft? I know you've been analyzing it, and for weeks, it feels like even months, all we've been talking about are those first 4 picks at the top of the draft. But I was speaking with Michael Lombardi. You had him on, I think it was last week, and we mentioned a startling stat, which is that I think it's, don't quote me on it, but in the last 10 years, just for context, there's only been like 2 quarterbacks who have been selected in the first round of the draft who have gone on to win Super Bowls, Patrick Mahomes among them. All that to say, you've got some of these franchise quarterbacks who have been chosen in later rounds that have ultimately been really, really fruitful for organizations down the line. As you assess this year's draft class, do you see the potential for value in some of these later rounds, the second and third rounds, for teams that might just want to start exploring but don't have, the bandwidth or the high power picks at the top of the draft to go get one of the guys that's making headlines?
Yeah, and I do, and it always seems Kirk Cousins is a perfect example. Drafted in the 4th round and turned out to be a pretty darn good quarterback. Hasn't gotten the Super Bowl, but that's a tough and the winning the Super Bowl is such a tough to a bar. It takes so much to win a Super Bowl championship. Not just with your quarterback, but sometimes when people like Mike or others bring that stat up, it's kind of very clever how they word it. There's been a bunch of first round quarterbacks who have gotten their teams to the Super Bowl, put their teams in position to win it. I know winning the Super Bowl is the ultimate goal, and I completely understand that. But there really haven't been that many quarterbacks, period, that have won the Super Bowl over the course of time, and especially recently. Tom Brady kind of has dominated that. And Aaron Rodgers, guys, he's won one and been to a couple. So it's a tough to just use the winning the Super Bowl. That's tough. And in fact, to me, I think, yes, you want to win the Super Bowl, but you also want to be a consistent winning team year in and year out. And typically a good quarterback is going to put you in that position, and you build around it. Then it's on you as an organization to take care of the rest. I mean, Jared Goff got the Rams to the Super Bowl. He took a team that was morbid for almost like the Raiders for that period of time. They were terrible. Well, in his second year, first full season in the playoffs, they made the playoffs. In his third year, they go to the Super Bowl. In his fourth year, they missed the playoffs by one game. Last year, they went to the playoffs and won a game. I know he didn't win a Super Bowl, but if you were to talk to Ram fans and they're honest about it, coming from where they had come from the last 20 years or so, that's like as high a point as they've had in decades. And Jared Goff had a big, say in that matter. So even though they didn't win the Super Bowl, that was a value pick at the top of the draft. He did his job and got that, helped get that franchise turned around. Now they've moved on to somebody else that they feel like can get them over the top. But just to always say winning the Super Bowl is the end all be all. I think a lot of organizations would also take, a Matt Ryan career where you're constantly in the picture, save for a couple of years here and there, and giving yourself a chance to be in that picture. And then other factors come into play: luck, injuries, a bad call, whatever the case might be. So that's just my 2 cents. I think that drafting quarterbacks in the first round, yes, there's definitely been some misses, but there's been a lot of hits, not maybe necessarily winning Super Bowls, but putting their teams in a much better position to at least, be in the picture, be in the conversation. I think first round quarterbacks have proven their worth.
Yeah, that's a really insightful counterpoint. Just one last one for you. I should have mentioned to Michael Lombardi that Tom Brady's selfish. I mean, that throws the stat out the window.
Right, exactly.
No, it's true. I think you raised a really good point, because you're right. It's about stability for an organization, not necessarily just checking off Super Bowls. There's a lot of different factors that go into it. I think it's really, really smart. What do you see Minnesota doing with the 14th pick in the draft?
Man, I think they go offensive line. I think they gotta protect Kirk Cousins, and that's been an issue now for a while. And I think that they made some moves defensively in free agency. I know they need more pass rush, but I think it's even more incumbent that they protect Kirk Cousins, and so I think they're going to go offensive line.
Vinny Bonsignore, thank you so much. Appreciate the time.
All right, you got it. Have a great day.